Welcome, viewers and listeners, to the Total Football Analysis EPL podcast. We are the Thinking Fans podcast. Each week, we get together with our besties who are current pro players, real coaches, and academics and stat heads. We are sponsored by the EPL Prospectus, a 280-page guide of the upcoming season created by a team of 25 plus writers and designers. Moneyball for football, analytics plus eye candy, available at www.thinkingfanmedia.com and on Amazon. Today, we are joined by I Got Your Back soccer analyst Harshal Patel. Also on the pod is Daniele Proch, a Forbes contributor and Total Football Analysis Serie A podcast host, who happens to be a professional striker for North Carolina FC. I am host Chris Mumford, known as the Professor. Bella ciao. During the international break, we reflect on how strange the season start has been. Have we moved to a parallel simulation or universe where Everton, Aston Villa, and Leicester are the top three in the Premier League? I want to go home. We offer our first take on Project Big Picture proposed by the ownership of Liverpool and Man United. Those Americans. We evaluate if teams have filled their soft spots in the transfer window. What are you doing, Man United and Chelsea? Finally, we preview next week's matches: Everton, Liverpool, Chelsea, Southampton, Man City, Arsenal, Man United, Newcastle, Leicester, Aston Villa, and Leeds-Wolves. But first, let's dive into big breaking news about Project Big Picture, a proposal by the ownership of Liverpool and Manchester United. Here's what they're offering: £250 million immediately to the EFL to compensate for lost match day revenue. $100 million one-off gift to the FA to cover for coronavirus losses. 8.5% annual Premier League revenue to go to operating costs and good causes, including the FA. For the remainder, 25% of all combined Premier League and Football League revenues will go to EFL clubs. 6% of gross revenues will go to pay for stadium improvements across the top four divisions. A fan charter, including capping away tickets to only £20 and away travel is subsidized. But this is what they're asking for: special status for the 9 longest serving clubs. Basically a vote of 6 of so-called long-term shareholders required to make major changes, including rules, regulations, removal of chief executive, as well as club ownership. The Premier League moves from 20 clubs to 18. 2 sides will be automatically relegated every season, and the top 2 championship teams promoted. The 16th place Premier League club moves into a playoff tournament with the championship's 3rd, 4th, and 5th place teams. There will be new rules on distribution of Premier League television income, as well as the abolition of the League Cup and Community Shield. There are some additional changes, including establishing a women's professional league independent of the Premier League or the FA, and all FFP regulations will apply. Overall, the clubs throughout the pyramid will reduce from 92 to 90. Harshal, what's your take on this proposal here?
It's intriguing, and I mean, there is quite a lot of good stuff in there in terms of obviously the money that's being offered to the EFL and the FA, and the continued support, the continued support that will be offered to the lower leagues. But I think it's basically a blatant power grab by the big 6 clubs in the Premier League to sort of consolidate most of the decision making power in their hands. And I don't know if I can't see any reason why the smaller Premier League clubs or the other Premier League clubs would necessarily be in agreement, even though I could potentially see the EFL clubs, so obviously the clubs in the Championship, League 1, League 2, maybe being open to this, because I think the amount of money they would get would increase drastically. But I can't see why the rest of the Premier League would agree to this. And if it does go through, I think it will just accelerate the move towards a European Super League, which we've been hearing about a lot over the last 4 or 5 years. There have been sort of attempts made by various clubs to try and set up a European Super League, and this sort of a development will basically make it easier and quicker to have that sort of a thing come through in the next few years.
Please don't. Please don't. I'm already feeling sad about this. It sounds very, very American as a proposal, and I really would not be able to follow a Super League. I have a question, Harshal. You were saying that for the proposal, obviously there's going to be a few years before this event takes place, but you were reading that the vote required would be 2/3 of the Premier League teams.
I'm not sure, and I mean, we'll probably need to do a bit of research in terms of how the vote would need to happen, because it also obviously involves the EFL teams, right? So it will probably need to go through at an EFL level and at a Premier League level. So I'm not sure if it would need a 2/3 vote in either of those two groups, or a simple majority would do. So we'll need to see, but I think a simple majority would suffice, because most of the Premier League resolutions are passed by simple majority. This one might need a 2/3 vote. I don't know. I'm not sure.
If it is the 2/3, basically you only need half of the teams, because you already have the big six voting yes.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
You're gonna need another 7, and that will be it.
Yeah. So it's quite tricky. I think I'm not really, as you said, it's a very American way of going about sports, and I don't think we can be surprised given that Liverpool and Man United, owned by American owners, are the ones driving this. And it's also interesting to note that Rick Parry, who's the head of the EFL, who's also come out publicly in support of this, and obviously has been working on this with the ownership of those two clubs. He is a former, I believe, chief executive of the Premier League, if I'm not mistaken. So he has had time heading the Premier League as well before he came into the EFL. So it's interesting. Let's see how it goes. But at first glance, I'm not really in favor of this. I'm not happy with this.
So let me provide a steel man argument for this, okay? Namely one that is for this change. Let's call a spade a spade. It's already a Big Six league, right? If you look at where most of the broadcasts are happening, it's amongst the Big Six. The EFL is in financial disarray. It is a disaster right now. Okay. It was a disaster before COVID. They were spending 104% of revenues on player salaries. So all it was doing was just counting on some new rich owner continuing to spend money to try to keep up with everybody else, right? So for the foreseeable future, the primary source of income for the EFL doesn't exist, and they still want to play games. Okay. And that's crazy. And so we have this nostalgic love that, oh, the local club is so important part of the community. And I totally get that. The problem is the local community either doesn't have the money or doesn't want to spend the money to support that local club. That's why it's in the predicament that it is. So in effect, we've got this pyramid it's going to crash at some point. And what the Big Six are saying is, hey, guess what? We've more or less won the championship going forward. We have such a natural competitive advantage. We are going to win it going forward. So why not basically create a sustainable system? And I hate to say this, but a more German system, right? Where you do have a more thoughtful, integrated, as opposed to historically catch as catch can. That would probably be the major argument that I would say is we've got to do it this way, just to keep this pyramid. And if we want to believe in community football, this is the price of doing business. Daniele, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's an interesting viewpoint on it. I wonder if this would. So would you say that this plan would help will be beneficial to keep having things like Leicester winning the league, one in 50 years. You know, the fairy tales, because we definitely do need that in football, and people do want to see that. So how do you see that playing out? Would you say that the gap will be too big for smaller clubs to have a shot at the higher position? You said it's already a Big Six league. Would the gap even widen even more, you think?
I think the gap's already pretty wide. Leicester was a major Cinderella story, of which, by the way, they had a tremendous amount of financing. This was not a Sheffield United that won the championship. I mean, at $16 million in payroll. So I think that yes, it's going to make sure that the entrenched players stay the entrenched players. There was zero threat of relegation, not that there ever was in the first place. So that's what I would think about that. I will tell you another key feature is I really think that these guys are playing for the long game, and they're going to say, okay, we're going to try to save the English pyramid. But if it doesn't, guess what? If they say no to us, we're popping off to do the Super League with the La Liga and the Serie A and all those other guys, because they're going to get a lot less flack if it's like, hey, we tried to save it, but the Premier League, who had its own entrenched interest, didn't want to do this. Would you? So this is in effect, they may not even be looking to do this. They may be going after the Super League concept, but they need to do this for political reasons. Harshal, what's your take?
Image.
What's that?
To safeguard their image.
That's exactly right. Harshal, what do you think about that?
Yeah, as I said earlier, that I mean, you could absolutely be right that this is sort of a smoke screen to make that happen, but I think that's a bit unlikely because, so for example, Andrea Agnelli, who is the CEO or the chairman at Juventus, and he heads the European Club Association, the ECA. He's basically been one of the most vocal advocates to create a European Super League, and it's something that will need the rest of the clubs to agree as well, right? So you need the likes of Real Madrid and Barcelona from La Liga to agree. From Italy, probably the Inter, Milan, and Juventus. Maybe Napoli, I'm not sure. Germany, it would probably be Bayern and Borussia Dortmund, for example. So whoever those clubs are, who they choose to go into with the European Super League. But I don't think that agreement will happen that quickly. And in any case, even this plan that they're talking about, if it does come into fruition, would probably be implemented around the 2022-2023 season. So that's 2 seasons down the line. So there is time for them to maybe come up with a plan and come up with the European Super League, but I don't think it's an imminent threat. What Daniele spoke about in terms of the gap widening. So the thing is, what is going to happen, in my opinion, is the gap is going to widen between the Premier League and the EFL for sure, because they're going to obviously, even though they will be giving money in terms of overall broadcast revenues, and 25% of which will go to all EFL clubs, I think the value of the Premier League broadcast deal is such that it's humongous. The money that comes into the Premier League from the broadcast deal dwarfs any other sports broadcast deal, let alone football, in the world. So that money is going to flow to the Premier League clubs, and within the Premier League, if they renegotiate their broadcast deal, which is pretty sort of equal, or I'd say it's pretty generous to every club at the moment, where even the team that finishes bottom in 20th place in the Premier League receives about £100 million a year just from broadcast money. They might renegotiate those deals to make it more attractive or more weighted towards the Big Six, with the argument that, hey, I mean, more people are going to tune in to watch a Man United versus Chelsea than a Sheffield United versus Brighton. So why should Sheffield United and Brighton get the same money that Man United and Spurs get, right? So as an example. So that might happen, which could increase the gap between the Big Six and the other clubs. And secondly, what is a very important point, I think, here is that group of 9 will have veto powers on ownership changes in the rest of the league, with a 2/3 majority in that group of 9, which means that's of those 9 clubs, only 6 clubs need to vote one way or the other for them to veto a proposed ownership change. And obviously that 2/3 is very conveniently comes down to 6. So then you have the Big Six being able to protect their interests, where, for example, if there is someone who's like a billionaire or someone coming in to buy a Sheffield United, for example, or a Brighton or a Newcastle, the big six could veto that and then just keep them where they are and not allow them to have the ownership and the money to break in. And that, I think, is the biggest challenge here, which I have trouble wrapping my head around.
Well, and that's absolutely true. And that's what the cost is for subsidizing or keep into existence community football in England, right? And again, the argument is
that it's those. I mean, it'll be those six controlling everything, right? So I don't think that's the price. That's too higher price, which I think to pay.
Okay.
Personally.
Well, I don't know if it is or isn't. I'm not completely settled on this. I'm clearly very American about things. I mean, I like the fact that the NFL and the NBA, that the worst team could end up being a playoff and win the Super Bowl or the finals. That to me is fun. I will tell you that I worry that the EPL is going to turn into another La Liga or Bundesliga where you have one or two teams and everybody else are banana peels for the most part, right? And right now, Serie A and EPL are the only, I think they're the really competitive leagues, right? And when I say competitive, it's 5 teams.
I mean,
we're 7 teams.
Even Serie A to an extent, I think, is relative. Juventus have won, 8, 9 titles in a row. So
I agree. That's a great point, but watch this season, right? And I'll mention another great point is that EPL, you've got the emergence of the Leeds, the Wolves, right? Sheffield United, I don't think is going to have the staying power for that. The Evertons, right? Where they could maybe even get in any one of those. I don't know if Leeds could become Champions League, but certainly Europa. So could the middle markets like the Leicesters continue, develop more in the EPL? I just think that when the house is burning down, you're not going to negotiate the cost of water at this point. And that's, I imagine, where most of the EFL is. But if you're in the bottom half of the EPL, you're like, well, wait a minute, this kind of sucks. But if I get relegated, at least I'm not going out of business, right? And that's something you have to seriously consider from just a survival perspective. We're going to be talking about this a lot more, guys, over the coming weeks. And I'm curious to see, is this going to start happening in Serie A? There was a proposal in June by some American investors to take over Serie A's marketing. La Liga is a little bit different because Barca and Real Madrid, they negotiate their own TV contracts, right? So they got it going on. I don't know enough about the Bundesliga, how that whole structure works, but I imagine it's well organized, well thought through, and everybody benefits in the right way. So I'm not worried about those guys. But let's go ahead and turn our attention. Transfer window wrapped up, okay? Let's go through some of the teams and just hit the very high notes on who we think did a good job. And so what team are we talking about? What were the gaps, and did they fill those gaps in the transfer window? Harshal, do you want to lead us off with let's go ahead and pick your favorite team, just because Man United. How have they done in the
if you want me to give them like an alphabet grade or something, I'd probably be like a D or something, or like a D? 4 on 10 or something like that.
Okay, so what were their biggest needs and what did they end up with?
According to me, United's biggest need was to bring in obviously someone on the right wing. United haven't had a natural right-sided player since, I can't remember, to be honest. I can't remember maybe Antonio Valencia. It's been a while since United have had a natural winger playing on the right, or even someone who can come inside, because since then we've seen Juan Mata and the failed Angel Di Maria season, and a number of other guys tried out there, but it's not a role that's been filled properly. So that was the priority. But at the same time, there was a need to have a top level centre back come in, left back cover, and I'd say a defensive midfielder as well. And when you look at the transfer business, they've hit just one of them. They've managed to bring in Alex Telles in from Porto, but even that deal was done on deadline day when it could have been done much earlier in the window. And there was nobody came in at centre back, nobody came in midfield other than Donny van de Beek, which is I'm happy with that signing, but it's again a curious one because it's a signing in an area where United are arguably quite well stocked with Bruno Fernandes, Paul Pogba, even Mata to an extent. They already have the creative midfielder type. So Van der Beek is a very good player, but I don't know if he was needed at this point ahead of other players. And obviously the whole Sancho saga dominated the summer and he didn't come in, and United ended up going for an 18-year-old from Peñarol in Uruguay, Facundo Pellistri. They've signed apparently one of the best young players in Europe in Amad Traore from Atalanta, who will come in January. He's a 19-year-old. And then obviously Edinson Cavani on a free transfer. So it's all of this happened on deadline day after Sancho obviously didn't work out. A loan deal for Dembele, Ousmane Dembele at Barcelona didn't work out. So it all smacks of desperation and a lack of long-term planning, which has been the hallmark of United ever since Sir Alex Ferguson retired. So in those 7-8 years since Ed Woodward became CEO or whatever his designation is, it's been characterized by last-minute trolley dashes and panic buying rather than actually going for the manager's targets. And it's the same thing this time. So
Daniele, any thoughts on the Man United transfer?
I agree that looking at the Man United front four, it has a lot of potential, especially the starters. So besides the last strange game, I think that going forward, they're going to be one of the best attacking sides. I was wondering, Chris, how do you see the goalkeeping battle evolving at ManU? Do you like seeing Dean Henderson on the bench, or does it hurt to see that?
Well, last game withstanding, right, which was just like this. A friend of mine who builds nuclear power plants says that you don't have a nuclear meltdown because of one big mistake. It's a series of little mistakes. Mm-hmm. So we're going to put that game aside. I think it's awesome that De Gea and Henderson are there. The playing styles are different. And I think you have two legit top 6 or top 8 starters fighting for one slot. The key is, can you keep them happy for the right time, right? I am worried. Well, I shouldn't say worried. I think that Man United should have put their money into defense. They've got plenty of offensive options. But I'm tired of hearing Man United fans say, oh, we need to drop another $80 million on a center back, when I see a $40 million team, which was formerly a $20 million team in Leeds United, more or less go head to head against Liverpool and Man City. And I just wonder if the manager or the players have the mindset of closing those gaps and gritting it out and winning the 50-50 balls. Soccer or football is not a game of rocket surgery, right? There are certain things you can do. And if there's a coach that can take championship level players and have them compete against the best in the Premier League, I think Man United is going to be able to get by on their existing players. So that's my take on Man United. Harshal, walk us through the other poster child for the transfer window, which is Chelsea.
So here's what I think of Chelsea's business now. It's quite interesting because they've gone out and backed Frank Lampard to the hilt. They've gone and bought the players he wanted. And obviously there is a bit of they had a bit of money left over because they had a 2-window transfer ban, which was reduced to 1, but then they didn't spend in January this year. So they didn't spend for 2 transfer windows. So they had that money plus this year's budget. It's important to note that they received 50-odd million from Atletico for Alvaro Morata this summer. So that also bolstered their coffers. So they had the money, they had the firepower basically in a window where not many clubs had that much money, obviously, because of COVID. So, which is why it looked like a bit of an outlier because it's backed up by the fact that they had the money to go out and spend. So it's not as if, Roman Abramovich is dug into his pockets and financed it again, which he may have to an extent, but they did have the money to go out and make those deals. What's interesting for me is the fact that they've gone and bought a lot of good attacking talent, and they've then tried to sort of make do with their defense, which I feel was the bigger concern for them last season. They conceded 54 goals. They finished 4th, but they conceded 54 goals in the league last season. So in my opinion, their defense should have been the priority for the team. but they've spent 50 million on Ben Chilwell, who's coming at left back, and they've bought Thiago Silva in on a free transfer, and Malangsa on a free transfer from Nice as well, but he's gone out on loan. The plan was always to send him out.
Don't forget Mendy. That's right.
And of course, yes,
Mendy,
12 million
who
on Edouard Mendy.
By every measure was probably the greatest difference maker of all the 5 leagues last year. Whether he transfers to the EPL, time will tell. Right. Daniele, what's your take on Chelsea's transfer?
Well, if you look at the bench of Chelsea, you have players like last game there was Mount, Giroud, Kovacic, Pulisic. They were on the bench, and it makes you think that in terms of rotation with Champions League and whatnot, they will be able to really keep up in any competition. But at the same time, when you have young players put together in the same team, it's not too easy to click right away.
And I think we're seeing that. I think in the first few games, we've already seen that even Lampard is struggling to figure out, okay, where do I play these guys? What are their best roles and all of that. For example, Hakim Ziyech he's not even fit enough yet. So once Ziyech comes into the mix, they've got. I completely agree. They have some absolutely brilliant, amazing, attacking talent. But as you said, the challenge for Lampard is going to be to figure out who to play and when to play and how to play them, which I think this season is going to be his it's going to define whether he's going to stay on at Chelsea or I wouldn't be surprised if he's fired at the end of the season because there's no excuse anymore, right?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be able to make a run for the title for this reason because you have established teams like City and Liverpool who have been working together for so long. You're going to see a lot of I would say waves in their performances. So sometimes it will make you think, wow, this team can really go far this year, maybe, and then they're gonna drop points maybe against a team in the bottom of the table. That's what I expect from Chelsea. That said, top 4 placement at the end, I think that it will be a disappointment yet after this campaign, after all the money they spent. It will be disappointing if they don't achieve that.
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you the way I look at this, it's the same as Man United. It's like saying, oh yeah, that's a Man United signing or that's a Chelsea signing. I just feel like it doesn't match what their real needs are, and they're just going out and trying to buy the best players they can, and they'll try to figure it all out. And I just think that you see the Liverpools of the world that are really being very intelligent. You know, they sang the blues, they didn't have any money, but they kept their mouth shut. And then they picked up, and you look at the transfers and you're like, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Check. That makes a lot of sense too. And I agree with you, Harshal, that they had a lot of money stockpiled and they were ready to go. But to me, I feel like part of my football development soul died when they brought in all those folks, because all these youngsters who helped them get to 3rd place, right? They're, the top tier ones, as Daniele said, they're sitting on the bench. But the next level down, they're all being loaned out for the 5th or 6th year in a row. And it's like, God, let's unlock some of this talent. It'll be interesting to see these guys. Werner, he's had 11 shots on goal. He hasn't scored 1. He's 2nd in the league for those that haven't been able to convert on high opportunity or on, dangerous opportunities. So we're going to see where that plays out. Let's go ahead and turn our attention to Arsenal. What's going on with Arsenal, Harshal? How did they do in the transfer window?
I mean, I think Arsenal are a hilarious club to follow just because of all the contrasting views you see if you follow, fan accounts or whatever on Twitter and elsewhere, because there's so much extremism in the fan base in terms of it's either absolutely great and Arsenal is the best club in the world and Arteta is going to win the Premier League, or he's absolute, he's no good at all and Arsenal are no good. And it always swings between extremes in terms of the mood on social media. So it's interesting to follow them in that respect. But having said that, I have been a big fan of the work that Arteta has done ever since he was appointed back in November, I think it was last year. Because even though, so he's had a lot less time in the dugout than, for example, Lampard and Solskjaer have had at Chelsea and United. respectively. But Arsenal are the club which look like they have a plan on the pitch. You can see a proper system. You can see the way in which he wants to play. You can see how he wants to use, which players he wants to use, and how he wants to use them, and all of that. So, as we've spoken about on the podcast earlier as well, it's about whether you want the process or the results. I mean, what takes primacy? And with Arsenal and Arteta at the moment, it's clearly the process that's the priority, and I think it's working out. And they've made some good signings as well. They've picked up Gabriel Magalhaes from Lille. I think that's a very good signing at centre back. They managed to convince Dani Ceballos to come back for another season on loan. And obviously the big one on deadline day was where they managed to sign Thomas Partey from Atletico after activating his release clause. So they've got that solid defensive presence in midfield, but he's also someone who can pass. So they have done well in the transfer window, I think, and probably pretty good contenders for top 4 this year.
Harshal, would you say that moving forward, Arsenal are going to have to figure out one player in that central midfield position that's going to be like the reference player? Because right now they're rotating, right? Ceballos, there's Xhaka. Do you think that's one of the few aspects where Arteta is going to come to a decision for the good of the team?
I wouldn't say one player, but so what we've seen from Arteta is he's played a 3-4-3 for the majority of this season and towards like the back end of last season, but he wants to play a 4-3-3. So we've seen in possession, Arsenal move from a 3-4-3 to a 4-3-3 pretty seamlessly, because he's had the option of playing Kieran Tierney as a left-sided centre-half, and he plays either Saka or Maitland-Niles at left wing back. So when the Arsenal have the ball, whoever's the left wing back, either of those two guys comes into midfield, becomes a third midfielder, and Tierney goes out and becomes a left back. So then you have, for example, this season it's been mainly, say, Xhaka and Elneny, who's somehow come back into this team after having been out on loan and basically going to leave Arsenal. But he's come back, and so it's Elneny, Xhaka, and one of Maitland-Niles and Saka, who's been the 3-man midfield. But now with these signings, and obviously I think once players get up to speed in terms of fitness, I wouldn't be surprised if it's Xhaka, Partey, and Ceballos as the first choice midfield. And when you look at that, I think that's a very complete midfield trio, because you've got guys who can pass, you've got guys who can tackle, you've got guys who can dribble. There's creativity in there. So rather than one player, I think if he manages to make Partey, Ceballos, and Xhaka his first choice trio in most games, I think that's a very good starting point for Arsenal.
Interesting. Let's turn our attention to maybe folks that seem to be a little more sane in their transfer policy. Liverpool. I think they are generally regarded as having some high marks in that. Harshal, what's your take on that?
This window has just been another example of Liverpool, I think, doing absolutely sensational business, because it's not just the fact that they've managed to buy the people they've managed to buy, but they've also managed to generate a lot of money through sales, which they've been doing for a while. Michael Edwards, who's the sort of de facto sporting director there, has done a fantastic job at that over the years. You look at some of the previous sales they've made, the likes of Jordan Ibe going to Bournemouth for 15 million, Dominic Solanke going for around 20 million. He's repeated the trick this time. He sold Ryan Brewster, who's yet to make a Premier League appearance, to Sheffield United for almost 24-25 million. He managed to sell an 18-year-old centre-half, Kijana Horvath, to Wolves for around 10 million. There have been a couple of other sales for sort of similar amounts. And then he brings in, in my opinion, one of the best central midfielders in the world, in Thiago, in for about 20 million. You bring in Jota from Wolves, who's just 23 years old. People tend to forget how young he is. He's just 23. For 45 odd million. So, and you solve the problem which you've had at left back, where you don't have backup, for 11 million. You've got Kostas Tsimikas in from Olympiacos for 11 million. So again, you've managed to fill the holes in the squad. You've managed to also have a bit of a new or a dimension that you didn't have earlier in terms of creativity from midfield, because the Liverpool midfield has always been very functional under Klopp. But with Thiago, they now have the option of, they've always had the likes of Alexander-Arnold and Robertson and Mane and Salah creating havoc from out wide. But hey, if that's not working, let's just give the ball to Thiago and he'll put a ball through for these guys to run onto. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that develops. But it's just another superb window, I think, for Liverpool.
Are we talking about the second worst defense in the league so far with 11 goals
It's been a
conceded?
crazy season so far, man. I mean,
So-
this season has just been crazy. On previous episodes, Chris and I have spoken about how this is going to be a very messy season, and that's what it is. That 7-2 is just, it was a bizarre Sunday, man. 6-1 earlier on, where United lost 6-1, and then Liverpool go on and better that and lose 7-2. Although I will say that the Liverpool have used a very high line this season. I think it's higher than what they were using last season as well. So that has been caught out quite a bit, and it's become like that's what Villa were doing. They were just because I remember in the second half against Villa there was a chance which Ollie Watkins, he had already scored a hat trick in the first half. And Adrian made a save with his foot. Otherwise, he would have got a fourth goal. But it came from Fabinho, who had moved moved back to centre half, and Joe Gomez had been substituted. So the centre backs were Van Dijk and Fabinho. Fabinho was on the halfway line. Van Dijk was ahead of the halfway line, and Watkins was basically free to run through. He had the entire half, and he couldn't be caught offside because Fabinho was in the opposition half. So when you're playing that high a defensive line, it's going to be easy for other teams to catch you out. So
Well,
I
I'm
think
going to
Klopp
take
might do well with that.
a different view, Harshal. It's clear they're moving up 10 yards higher, maybe even farther than they did last season. I just like the fact that Klopp is experimenting with something new. And if his hand gets slapped, his hand gets slapped. Let's remember in that game, there were 3 deflected shots that went to the goal. You had Adrian really fuss things up by giving away that first goal. And Daniele, I'd love to hear your take. What happens when your starting keeper disappears, your starting striker who put a lot of pressure on the ball to avoid those long balls going in, as well as you had your captain Henderson, who is really the hammer in the midfield. All 3 of those guys are gone. How does that change a mindset of a team?
Well, if it had been up to me this transfer window, I would have recruited defenders that can deflect the ball off the goal instead of on goal. But no, that game was strange. Like you said, a lot of things didn't go well. If you know what the episode that summed it up was Trent Alexander-Arnold miscalculating that ball at the end. That's not him. That's not him. Because if you realize that the ball is too long, then you drop and you run back. You don't gamble on the ball. Yeah, Chris, in that game, it's hard. It's impossible to just talk about all the things that went wrong. But about the keeper, I would argue that Adrian had some signs of maybe not being ready when called up last season. If you remember against Atletico in Champions League, he had that terrible pass, and we've heard about Adrian being responsible for a couple of goals in important games for Liverpool. Would you have done something about it in the transfer window? Because
to be honest, Daniele, sorry to interrupt, but so the EFL window is still open. So clubs can still, like clubs in England, the Premier League, they can still buy from clubs in the Championship and lower leagues and vice versa. And according to rumors and whatever's going around, Liverpool are moving for Jack Butland, who's at Stoke. He's a former England keeper. I think he's got more than 10 caps for England, maybe or maybe not, but he has played for England a few times. And they're apparently moving for Jack Butland, and if they sign him in time, he could probably go into the team straight away against face Everton at the weekend. So what you're saying, that they might just be moving to sort of correct that area of the pitch.
Gotcha.
So we should wrap up on Liverpool, even though I love talking about them. But I will say that they signed an 18-year-old goalkeeper, Marcelo Pitaluga. Am I saying that right, Daniele?
You caught me up unprepared here. Pitaluga?
It's Pita, Pitaluga, Pitaluga.
Okay.
He's Brazilian. And actually, his trainer is Alisson's brother on this. So I think the Brazilian goalkeeper pipeline is alive and well. And I'm okay with where Liverpool is, because I'd love to have signed Emi Martinez, but he wanted to be the starter, and there's no way that was going to happen at Liverpool. So let's change our gears to Tottenham. How did what did the grade that they got in this transfer window here, Harshal?
I think they had a pretty good window, and for once, I think Mourinho even though, I mean, he can find reasons to complain about anything, but I don't really think he can complain too much about this transfer window at Spurs, because they had a pretty good window. I mean, they brought in one of the best young left backs, I think, in Europe in Reguilon. They managed to get Gareth Bale back, and obviously he's not played yet, he's not fit, so time will tell in terms of how effective he will be on the pitch. But even just off the pitch, and just for all the connections that he has with Spurs and all of that, it's still a great signing just to boost fan morale and even morale in the dressing room, because you've got someone who's won 4 Champions Leagues, someone who scored in 2 of those finals, and probably one of those goals is probably the greatest goal in the history of the Champions League, right? So, and they managed to bring in cover for Harry Kane as well. They've signed Carlos Vinicius on loan from Benfica. So, all in all, I think they've had a brilliant transfer window in terms of, again, filling the areas where they needed to. And of course, I forgot, they've also got Matt Doherty in from Wolves at right back. Although I will argue that he may not necessarily be an upgrade on Serge Aurier, because he's mostly played as a wing back for Wolves, which is very excelled, and he's always been shaky when played as a back four. For example, for Ireland, whenever he's played as a right back for Ireland, he struggled, and he struggled for Spurs as well in the first few games. But overall, I think it's been a very good window for Spurs, and again, should be top 4 contenders with the way they've done their business.
Nice. I think one of the key features for them is if they stay healthy. Last year, there were so many injuries, and watching Son and Kane's just connecting has been an absolute, probably the most interesting 2-player combination so far of all the leagues. So far.
And the most important thing about Tottenham is that they have to stop being a group of nice guys. They have to start being a group of...
Hey, that's all it takes. That's all it takes.
We saw that at Old Trafford, didn't we? We saw what Lamela did.
It doesn't. That's exactly right. Lamela is the prototype for that. Let's spend just another minute or so, Harshal. What are some the best of the rest in terms of signings? What do you think are going to be some absolute big difference maker signings for the other clubs that we didn't discuss?
I think Everton and Aston Villa, I mean, I know we're talking about individual signings, but just in terms of overall transfer business, Everton and Aston Villa have absolutely smashed it as well. Mm-hmm. You look at Everton, James Rodriguez, what a player, what a class player that they've brought into the Premier League, and they got him for a free. Obviously, because Real Madrid wanted to get rid of him, but he's linked up with Ancelotti, under whom he's had some of his best club football. So, and he's already showing in the Premier League. He's showing his class. He's scoring goals. He's setting up his teammates. He's able to sort of keep possession and sort of sprinkle that little bit of magic in the final third. And even the other guys they've brought in, they've essentially bought a new midfield, right? Allen and Abdoulaye Doucouré came in as well. They signed Ben Gibson towards the end of the window. So they've got a young, talented English centre-back in as well, because they didn't have depth at centre-back. And this is obviously not a transfer, but Ancelotti seems to have unlocked Dominic Calvert-Lewin. He's scoring goals for fun, both for Everton and for England as well. He scored on his debut for England. So I think Everton are extremely exciting to watch at the moment, and their transfers have been really good, and that makes next week's game really interesting, the Merseyside derby. And secondly, Villa, again, made a lot of top quality additions to the team, filled up holes where they needed to be. They've had issues at goalkeeper. I think Dean Smith used 4 or maybe even 5 goalkeepers last season. So Emi Martinez has come in, and he's become the first Villa goalkeeper to keep 2 successive clean sheets in a row in, I think, 8 years, which tells you everything that's been going on at that club.
Yeah.
So Martinez has come in. They've got Ross Barkley in on loan, which will make that midfield absolutely brilliant. Ollie Watkins from Brentford, superb signing as striker. And Matty Cash at right back. He's gone under the radar a little bit, but they signed him for 18 million from Forest. Another young English player who used to be a midfielder, but he moved to right back a couple of seasons ago and absolutely killed it in the championship, which is why they moved for him. So again, weak spots addressed, and they look like a very good, solidly coached side at the minute. So I expect Villa and Everton to do well this season based on those transfers and the fact that their managers look like they're getting the best out of those guys.
Daniele, how about you? Any signings you want to mention real quickly?
I think that overall, the Premier League has to be happy, because I'm looking at the standings, individual standings for goals scored, and I see so many English flags. Calvert-Lewin. I see Vardy, Wilson, Mumford, Harry Kane. And I was reading an article by Sky Sport, and this is the highest number of goals scored after 4 rounds in the Premier League in a decade, 37, and that's already 12 more than last year. So I think that also with a view to the Euros coming up, I think that England should be happy as a nation.
Well, I will tell you, it helps when City A spending net spends for the league about 50 million investment. La Liga is probably around that number, and the English Premier League has exercised discipline, and they only spent 1.1, 1.2 billion in transfers. So it's not a big surprise to see all those goals being scored, of which brings up a really good point, Daniele. In the last 2 or 3 years, have you seen the striker position or the style of play evolve? My first impression is target strikers, at least in the English Premier League. Lacazette is sort of that. Harry Kane is sort of that. But I really feel like that Giroud type of target or Lukaku has largely disappeared in the EPL. Tell me what your thoughts are on the evolution of what it is to be a striker and how that applies to your own game.
Yeah, first off, I would like to defend Giroud, because even if he doesn't score much, the work that he does off the ball is unbelievable. He always keeps the center backs occupied. And if you build the right system around them, you're going to have players, whether these are the attacking midfielders or wingers or even central midfielders making runs. He's going to make the team successful, aka France at the 2018 World Cup. But I don't know if it exactly how it evolved. I will say that there is a consistency in that it's always the number nines, the strikers playing in maybe as a center forward in a 3-man system, or as one of the 2 forwards. If you play with 2 strikers, there is the exception of Liverpool because of the way they play, with Firmino being, we talked about the false 9 and the wingers getting a lot of goals. But other than that, you have Kane, you have Vardy, you have the usual faces, and I don't see that changing significantly in the next couple of years.
Okay, how about your take, Harshal?
Yeah, it's definitely changed, and again, shout out to Olivier Giroud, because he became the second goal scorer in France's history in this past week, which he's clearly doing something right if he's managed to go past Michel Platini in the scoring charts, and he's only behind Henry. So in the Premier League, I think, yes, that the target man as such, and say about 15, 20 years ago, it was quite usual to see teams set up in a 4-4-2, and they had, it was literally like a big man and small man combo, where there would be one target man and there would be a quick sort of dynamic striker around him who would be there to play off the long balls that he would win and the second balls that he would win and try and create stuff from there. But it's the tactical shift that we've seen, where teams don't really play with 2 strikers anymore. If you're playing with one man up front, I think that and the way the game has evolved, that one man has to do a lot more than just be a focal point or just be a poacher. Even with Lacazette, as you mentioned earlier, under Arteta, we've seen him come and play almost like a false 9, because he drops into midfield, he drops deep, picks up the pass from, say, the midfielder, and then spins around and runs into the space. It's not just about staying, high up front. And that's how I think the role has evolved, where you need to be a complete centre forward. Look at Harry Kane. That's what he's basically doing for Spurs, and even for England, right, where he's dropping deep and playing Son in through. But he also obviously has the ability to score goals, which he's done throughout the years, the last 4 or 5 years. So it's a very difficult position, I think, to play in the league now, in the Premier League, because you have to be an all-rounder. That's why Ryan Brewster arguably didn't make it, was sold by Liverpool, because he is a penalty box poacher and someone who plays on the last line, and that's not how Klopp wants his strikers to play, which is why they sold him.
Yeah. Well, I really find it very interesting how the position is evolved and how it's going to evolve further, where you have a Firmino who isn't necessarily a target striker, but he just does so much work in the engine room to free up the other strikers. I will tell you, along a similar note, and one that I think it was an outstanding signing, the Leeds signing Rodrigo, who obviously made an immediate impact in that 1-1 tie with Man City, and of which Leeds could have won that game 3-1 if it weren't for the heroics of Ederson. But I'm going to be really interested to see how Rodrigo evolves from Valencia, and was picked up almost for pocket change, a mere £20 million. And he's a Spanish international, right? Brazilian born, but Spanish international. And I'm excited to kind of see how how his position evolves in the Bielsa system. So really fascinated to see where things go, and fascinated to see where our own star Daniele's how his game evolves over time. So
Chris, about Rodrigo, I would say that the goal against City was a way for him to have the Leeds fan forgive him after what he did in his debut against Liverpool, causing that quite unclever PK in the, what was it, 85th minute, which then gave Liverpool the win. But I agree, he's got a lot of potential, and I see him fit very well with Leeds. I don't know if he's gonna carve out a starting spot for himself. That remains to be seen.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how a Bamford Rodrigo will there be the mojo for that. Time will tell, but like that pickup very much. Let's turn our attention to some of the previews for the upcoming weekend. Everton, Liverpool. Just give us some high notes, Harshal. What are the 2 or 3 points that we need to pay attention to, and how could there be a surprise? Because Liverpool, despite their 7-loss drubbing, are still a very strong favorite amongst the sports books.
Liverpool will obviously start as favourites, but this is probably the best chance that Everton will have to win a Merseyside derby. It's the best chance they've had in the last 10 years or so. They've not won a Merseyside derby, I think, in 10 years. So, and bear in mind that Liverpool will still be missing Thiago because of COVID. They'll be missing Mane. Naby Keita has also tested positive for COVID on international duty. So that's 3 players who will not be featuring, 2 of them in midfield. So I'm really interested to see what sort of team he puts up, because I think Jordan Henderson will be back, because he's playing for England later tonight against Belgium. So I'm assuming he'll be back in midfield. So it's not really that Liverpool won't really have a midfield, because they'll have their first choice in terms of Fabinho, Wijnaldum and Henderson, but they won't have Thiago and Keita, the guys who are the sort of difference makers in terms of creativity. And secondly, we spoke about the high line that Liverpool have used. Again, very interested to see if they keep up with that against Everton, because you've got Calvert-Lewin, you've got Richarlison, who can sprint through and go one-on-one if you give them space, and you've got James, who can play those passes to them accurately. So I really want to see how James whether he manages to find space in those pockets around the Liverpool midfield and defense, and whether the likes of Allen and Doucouré can shut down Liverpool's attacks, because it's always going to be directed through the flanks with Robertson and Alexander-Arnold, and then sort of supplying the ammunition for the likes of Mane. Obviously Mane isn't there, so Salah and I guess Jota will start. So yeah, I think it will be an interesting game. Liverpool will be slightly weakened, and after that 7-2, I think this could be a good chance for Everton to capitalize.
Give us a scoreline.
1-1.
1-1.
I don't think Liverpool will manage.
Daniele, what do you think? You agree with that?
You have a very angry Liverpool side who's called to react to the embarrassing result against Villa. And on the other end, you have an Everton side who are flying too high, and they're going to be brought back to earth in this game. 3-0 Liverpool.
3-0 Liverpool. You heard it here. I like that. Chelsea, Southampton. This to me still feels like Lampard has some little more formidable competition to put the puzzle pieces together. Harshal, what's your quick take on that game?
Again, if the teams play with the tactics as they have so far, I think Chelsea will walk away with it, because Hasenhüttl is another one who's played a very high line for some reason. Not that he didn't play a high line, and that goes with the pressing approach that he employs, but again, it's been 10 yards higher than what we've seen earlier on last season and from them, and they've been torn apart as well. Spurs tore them apart because of that high line, and Chelsea have the attackers to do that. I mean, Werner is one of the best players in the world if you give him that space behind the defensive line. So this actually might be the game where we see Werner finally score and sort of get his name on the Premier League scoring charts and show Chelsea fans what he's all about. So I want Southampton to adjust, but yeah, in terms of scoreline, maybe 3-0 Chelsea.
3-0 Chelsea. How about you, Daniele?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say that another English striker will score, Danny Ings, so Southampton will have one, and then I'm going to go for the Italian guy again on PK, Jorginho, 1-1.
I agree. I'm going to go 1-1 on this one, too. This is just a banana peel. Southampton's been playing really tough. And, you know, a lot of the Chelsea players are coming back from international duty, while as yet Southampton has unfortunately not had to worry about that problem there. Man City Arsenal. Let's talk about that. Daniele, lead us off the top. What do you expect to see out of this game, and what sort of surprises could happen?
Well, this is the game that you labeled a couple months ago. Look, I'm your father, huh? That's the connection.
You're right.
I see Man City winning this because they have not started off the right foot so far, with the loss against Leicester and the draw against Leeds. I see them winning, obviously conceding a goal at least. I see them winning 2-1 or 3-1. Tactically, we're going to leave it up to Harshal to help us see what's going to happen there. It's going to be a tactical masterpiece, hopefully.
Harshal, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, as we've spoken about this earlier in the previous podcasts, and where Arteta is sort of trying to implement this similar system to what Pep has at City, but he also obviously has all the inside knowledge in terms of maybe where there's a weakness in the City system. And as I don't know, I mean, my heart tells me that City will win this one, but it could be tricky because remember, they don't have either Aguero or Jesus, and you do have obviously the likes of Sterling who can score, but you lose out on a lot when you don't have not just one but two of your most clinical finishers. So they will create chances. They will, and the Arsenal defense will probably struggle a little bit, but they are stronger than they were maybe a few months ago. So in terms of scoreline, I'm going for, again, I think it would be a close one. I think it might just be a 1-1.
So the bookmakers are having Man City as big favorites. I agree with that, largely because the most underreported thing in the English Premier League is the injuries Man City has had. Laporte and Silva have just come back, right, in the last game. Aguero, Cancelo, and Gundogan are supposed to be available for that upcoming match. Now, I don't know if I don't know if they're going to get the full time, but if you have those 5 players missing along with Jesus, you're going to have a step down. So I'm willing to give Man City a pass for the first 3 games that they've played with those sort of injuries. So I think it's going to be a 3-1. And there's going to be one cool Aubameyang counter-strike, and Man City's going to dominate possession. It's going to be 70+% possession. And they're going to have a super high line, and that's why Aubameyang's going to get his goal. So let's go ahead and turn our attention to the next match, which is the Man United Newcastle game. Harshal, give us the short version, because I know you probably want to talk about this a lot, but can they right the ship?
Maybe not, because a game against Newcastle is probably the sort of banana peel for Solskjaer and the way he plays. We all know under Solskjaer, United love teams who attack and have the ball, because then they have the space to counter-attack. And Newcastle are the absolute opposite. They will sit back in their own half. There will be no space in behind for the likes of Rashford and Greenwood to run onto. Remember that Martial is suspended, so they won't have Martial. Cavani will not play because his quarantine period will not have ended. So they'll probably have to move Greenwood or Rashford into the center forward position and play someone else on the flanks. So I can see this being one where United drop points again. It could probably United have the individual quality to win the game, but tactically it seems as if United might slip up. So again, probably maybe a 1-1 or maybe a 0-0.
So on one hand, we have a team who will fight to not relegate this season, and on the other hand, we have Newcastle. So hey, it's just what 1 point above the drop right now. What is it?
But City even Man City have like 4 points from 3 games. They're a point ahead of United. So
hey, I'm very confident Man United will do well in the championship. I think they'll do fine in that league.
Especially if with that project, the big picture we're talking about, we're gonna have one of the big 6 in the championship.
Exactly right.
But I see Solskjaer really scolding off his guys, and again, big teams. If you're expected to be a big team, you don't have 2 losses in a row, right? That's kind of a rule.
Give me a score. Give me some score lines, guys.
2-0 Man U.
I am going to be super pessimistic and go for 0-0 so that if United actually do end up winning the game, I can be a little bit happier.
I'm going to go 1-0 Man U on that one. So good. Well, let's go ahead and turn our attention to the Leicester Aston Villa, where Aston Villa is going to get a pretty stern test after passing the first test of Liverpool.
Yeah, because this is obviously a game between the two of the teams who've been sort of the surprise of the season so far in terms of how well they've done. I think Leicester might just be able to get over Villa in terms of a result, but I think Villa will still show enough in the game that they won't get relegated because they have the players. They now have the players to not be involved in the relegation fight. They should be in probably lower mid-table now. So I'd go for a 2-1 win to Leicester, but Villa to show everyone that, you know what, we're not going to be in relegation trouble and we'll be comfortable this year.
Well, Daniele, what's your prediction on the scoreline of the number 2 team in the Premier League versus the number 3 team in the Premier League?
Well, Aston Villa have 11 goals scored, 2 goals against. So I wonder if they're gonna be able to contain Vardy. I'm gonna play safe and say it's gonna be a 1-1 draw. What about you, Chris?
That's such an Italian answer, but I'm gonna agree with you.
It's good for both. They're gonna make an agreement. 1-1.
I think it's gonna be. I'm gonna go 2-1 Leicester just to be different from what you were, even though I was thinking 1-1 myself. So, how about the final interesting matchup of the week, the upcoming weekend, which is the Leeds-Wolves game? This is kind of the Europa spot in the league. What do you think is going to happen here, Harshal?
I mean, 4 games into the season, I think it's still a little too early maybe to say that Leeds will be challenging for Europa.
Oh, I've drunk the Kool-Aid. I have drunk the Kool-Aid.
No, I agree with some. I mean, it's hard not to get carried away with Leeds, right? I mean, in terms of how they play and the whole Bielsa cult and everything, it's just they're a very attractive sight to watch on the pitch as well. So, yeah, I can see them making a run for Europa, but this game will tell us a lot about that team because Wolves have been one of the most sort of, tenacious and hard-working sides in the league over the last 2 seasons. But this year, it seems as if something's going a little bit wrong in terms of how they're setting up, or just because they've lost a couple of key players, which they've not done earlier, right? They've lost Jota and they've lost Matt Doherty, who were key parts of that team. So Nuno is having to integrate new players into the team. And I mean, even though you can argue that having a £35 million right back from Barcelona isn't exactly a challenge to sort of, be upset about because he's a really good player, Nelson Semedo, who's come in to replace Doherty. But I think Leeds will be able to give Wolves quite a run for their money. This will be a close game, 1-1.
I think
Wow.
it's gonna be one of the most intense matchup for the rhythm, for
Yeah.
the tackling, the committed runs, the execution of the passes. So it's definitely one to watch. I hope they don't cancel each other out. Um, and I hope we're gonna see a classic high scoring games, maybe a 2-2.
My take is that the Wolves are very comfortable sitting back, and they just have an awesome team ability to counterstrike. But I'm still going to go with Leeds 2-1 on this one here, because I still think they're the real deal.
You're on the
And
Leeds bandwagon.
totally, even if they don't even make it to Europa, I just feel like they've infused a level of hope and possibility for the league where you don't have to Chelsea or Man U your way to a championship, that you can be really intelligent even without the money. I don't think they're going to win the Premier League anytime soon. Liverpool is an example of kind of the hipster effort plus tactics plus money, but I just feel like it would be great if the Premier League could populate itself with more folks that can take advantage of the 21st century way of playing football. So Harshal, I want to ask you one final question before we wrap things up. Earlier, we talked about themes for the league, about it being messy, about dogma versus pragmatism. I think this weekend's going to be a great acid test for the dogmatists. How pragmatic are they against sides they're playing? Leeds and Wolves being a perfect example of that, right? What are some other observations you have as we wind down the podcast here?
Small sample size, but it seems as if defending has gone for a toss this season. There's been some atrocious defending in the league so far. And I'm not just talking about, I mean, obviously, some of the penalties that have been given away have been for handballs, and the new handball law, all of that is there as well. But just otherwise, just it seems as if players have forgotten their basics, and United were one of the guiltiest parties against Spurs in terms of that particular accusation. But even Liverpool, we've seen some poor defending from Liverpool. We've seen poor defending from Sheffield United, for example. We all used to hold. We were all sort of um, enthralled by how, despite scoring just 38, 39 goals last season, they finished where they did in the league because of their defense and their goalkeeper. But Sheffield United haven't been that strong defensively. Other sides, even City, for example, they have been open in general, but you'd expect them to not concede 5 against a Leicester side and give away 3 penalties in that game. None of them were for handball, and all 3 were committed by 3 different players for fouls in the box. So I don't know what's happening with defending, whether it's because it's a short preseason, whether it's because teams haven't really had a lot of time to be able to play together and get that defensive rhythm and sort of structure back, whatever the reason is. But it seems, and that's also why so many goals are being scored. So I
It's
think
probably
that theme's
not a
going to continue.
coincidence that the team managed by an Italian coach is first in the league.
So that's all it takes, huh, to create a championship side. Daniele, besides that observation, what other observations do you have about the league?
Observation, some crazy results. Some, Liverpool, like we said, second worst defense in the league. Obviously, that's gonna change, but that was surprising, as well as Man U pulling off some very sad performances. But I don't know, Chris. It's still too early. I think that by when Christmas comes around, we're gonna have Liverpool back on top. We're gonna have, I think, you know what, Tottenham could be up there if they begin being a team of that word. But I see Man City also emerging from the 14th position that they are right now, and then we'll see. I don't know. What do you have, Chris? Do you think Everton will hold up to the high places?
I don't think they will, but I hope they do. I will say that I've heard so much commentary on why this season has been funny, and the main suspects are short preseason, higher lines, that those have been the ones that sort of resonate with me. To me, injuries. You know, I really feel like, unfortunately, injuries are going to be one of the main actors of this season because of the congestion that we're going to have. And
don't forget COVID in terms of teams losing out
Yeah.
on key players to COVID.
absolutely. So my take on it is, I'm willing to forgive, right, the defenses in the last few weeks, because this is what their preseason was, right? And now we're kind of getting to the business of the regular season kicking into earnest. I'm a Liverpool fan. I enjoy watching Man City play, but I'm so happy that Aston is up there and Everton is up there to make the league. At least this smoky myth that the Premier League has parity, and because I want it to. I really want to believe that. I think dollars and cents are going to be what drives it. And I'm sorry if that sounds cynical, but that's kind of the people with the resources generally do best in everything in life. So I'm just looking forward to, I hope, one of the most entertaining leagues in years. And I see that happening in the EPL. I see that happening in the Serie A. I don't see that happening in La Liga or Bundesliga, right? And I want to put my seatbelt on and enjoy myself. So so with that, guys, we should probably wrap up. Thank y'all so much. We are sponsored by the EPL Prospectus, a 280-page guide of the upcoming season, created by a team of 25 plus writers and designers. Moneyball for football, analytics plus eye candy, available at www.thinkingfanmedia.com and on Amazon. For now, bella ciao, ciao ciao.